have a few stories that we can go through.
We'd love to hear them.
So basically, I'll start from the very beginning. Um, when I was a toddler, and this is how this one was told to me by my family, so on and so forth, my mother. But I was roughly about the age of 3, and my mother put me to bed, and she put my baby brother to bed, and a couple hours later, apparently I came out of the bedroom and my mother was like, "What are you doing up?" And I was like, "Well, there's a lady at my window, a white lady, and she said I'm special." And so, at that point, people start freaking out a little bit. But the only window in this room is like at the top near the ceiling. So anybody that was trying to look in or do anything with this window, which was fairly small to begin with, would have had to have been on, like a 6 foot step ladder.
That's
And
weird.
so, yeah, definitely odd. And so, like, I can still visualize this room to this day. And this was 37 years ago. Um, and so, my mother and my stepdad, they called, uh, you know, sheriff's office and called my grandparents, and they all came out and they were searching around, couldn't find anything, couldn't find any footprints or anything. They brought a couple of the dogs out, so on and so forth. And so that basically kind of sets up, where it started off at, you know what I mean, as far as what I've dealt with throughout the years.
Mm.
Um, and so they were like, the only thing they could think of was that maybe it was like some sort of angel that visited us or something along those lines. Um, you know, and then fast forward, about 20 years, 20, 30, about till I was about my mid 20s. I started having uh, basically, I guess you call it premonitions, although I really didn't think about it much at the time. Um, I started playing poker, so on and so forth, with buddies, and we would go down into the, in the basement, play cards, so on and so forth. And there were a few times when we would be playing cards and I'd be sitting there and all of a sudden, prior to a card coming up, we'd play Texas Hold'em mostly. And prior to a card being shown out of the deck, the actual card that was about to be dealt would flash in my head right
Hmm.
beforehand. And I've had that happen to me several times. And
Interesting.
so, yeah, yeah, and it freaks you out for sure. I mean, like the first time I can still remember that, and it was a jack of clubs, and like like when it flashed in my head, I was like, well, that's weird, and then it just dropped, and I was like, holy cow! I
Did
was
it
like, did that really just happen?
did it remain involuntary, or are you able to harness that?
No, it's basically just kind of, it does something when it wants to. It definitely no control or anything like that. I wish I could, I wish I could, you know, control like some
Go
lottery
go play
numbers or
lottery.
something like
Yeah,
that.
that'd be sick. Walk up into a casino
Yeah,
with that power.
yeah, but I'm like, it definitely freaked me out when I did that, and so because it was one of those times I was like, I really wanted to be able to go back and be like, hey, I saw this card just like pop in my head before it flopped. But at that point, it was like, what can you do other than like, you know, that you just experienced that.
Right.
So, but yeah, you know.
Do you think that power has anything to do with what you saw as a kid?
Very possible, because it goes even farther than that with this as well. Because fast forward to 2012 time frame, we're living out in Colorado at this point, and best way that I can explain these were they were like full on visions, and I had a series of 3 of them, and
Like
but
right in a row?
No. Um, 2 of them were a week apart, and then the third one was about 9 months after the second one. And I was asleep when they happened. And these dreams were the most vivid dreams I've ever had in my life. And it's hard to explain, but like the feeling that I got when I woke up from these was like sleep apnea on steroids type thing. You know what I mean?
Were you seeing certain events play out?
Yeah.
Can you say?
Yeah.
Can you share those?
Oh yeah, and that's what I was about to get to. So the first one was fairly, mundane, um, because at that point in time, my mother and my brother were out in California visiting my stepdad. He worked out there, and so in the dream, about 30 minutes after I woke up in the dream, I get a phone call from my mother, and she was like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that your brother and I are going to be flying home in the morning." And so, there wasn't much to the dream other than that and a little bit of small talk. And so I wake up, in this like severe cold sweat, couldn't hardly breathe. I was gasping for air, so on and so forth. I could tell that I'd been very restless. And then I fall back asleep probably about an hour later. I wake up at the exact, basically the exact same time in real life that I did in the dream, which was approximately 8:30 in the morning, and laid there for about 30 minutes like I did in my dream. And then my mother calls me. And I was like, wow, that's weird. And so a little bit of small talk. And then she's like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that your brother and I are going to be driving home in the morning." And I'm like, holy crap. I told her, I was like, "You're not going to believe this, but this is so surreal because I literally just had a dream about this last night, that you were going to be doing this." And so she was like, "Well, that's weird." And I was like, "Yes, that is very weird." So at this point I'm starting to freak out just a little bit because I have no idea what's going on other than I just had a dream that, basically came true. And
I've had similar experiences to that, and the way that I take it is that perhaps you are exactly where you need to be.
Yeah.
Like
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think maybe it could be gut nudging you, being like, "Hey, like, congrats on being on this poker game with your buddies. Like, you needed this."
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it gets even crazier because to a degree, these dreams, visions, whatever you want to call them, have definitely had they've definitely had an impact on how some of my life has progressed. Without a doubt. And getting into the second dream, this one gets it definitely gets even more interesting, because this one actually dealt with my brother-in-law, who at the time of the dream, was over in Iraq, and he had about 2 weeks left on that tour that he was doing, because he did a lot of contracting after he got out of the Army, and so he was over in Iraq, and I don't know much about what he did over there, so can't answer any type of questions about that. But in the dream, I know that they had gotten into some sort of action with, just call them enemy combatants. Not I couldn't tell you what actually transpired, other than they were taking fire. I remember in my dream, there were some mortar rounds that came in, as well as a couple RPGs, and then in the course of what happened in that dream, he was shot. And so basically, same protocol as the week before. I woke up, I was basically shaking, couldn't hardly breathe, pillow was soaked with sweat, so on and so forth, whole 9 yards. And at this point, I'm like, wow, that was like so crazy, and but obviously I couldn't I didn't really have a way to contact him to talk to him about that, but I knew the exact time and the date, so on and so forth. So when he got back a couple weeks later and I had a chance to talk to him, I was like, hey, this is going to sound kind of weird, but did you guys have some sort of issue on this day at around this time, your time? You're like, yeah, we got, we had some stuff go down. I was like, that's about all I really want to know, because at this point I'm like, okay, this is so crazy. And then fast forward about 9 months, because I really tried not to focus on it too much.
On like the dreams?
Yeah, I was like,
it was freaking you out?
It was definitely freaking me out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so fast forward about 9 months, I guess somebody was like, hey, I'm going to do it to you again. And so I have another dream. And this one, at first I thought it was a 3-part dream, but since I've had roughly about 11 years to mull through these dreams, I believe it's actually a 4-part dream. And the first part's very, very odd, and some people are going to be like, yeah, that's just like weird, because it had to do with cantaloupes. And it was kind of weird because my brother and I were sitting there talking to a couple girls, and they were like, we asked them what their name was, and they were like, our name's Cantaloupe. And I was like, well, that's just weird, and asked them how old they were, and they said they were 17, and my brothers are younger. So, I was like, well, that's just weird, and then it flashed to a second part. And the second part was that I was with another individual. I could never see their face because they were always kind of in the shadows. And we were on some sort of mission, like a military mission, law enforcement, something along those lines, where it was kind of secretive. And we were on a mission through the woods with an objective. And so we're basically just running for a little while. I never really reached an objective with that part before it flashed to a picture of a school building that had red brick. It was made of red brick. And then after the red brick school building, everything's on fire and there's an Apache flying through and like everything, everything's blowing up.
Mm.
And so I'm like, okay, same protocol. I wake up, cold sweat, breathing, can't hardly breathe, whole 9 yards. And I'm like, okay, this is getting crazy. And so it's, you go back to the first part and I'm like, okay, well, what does this have to do with anything? About a month afterwards, I actually remembered seeing something in some local news articles about some individual that got arrested for something that had to do with cantaloupes. And I can't remember exactly what happened with the individual, but
We'll have
I'm
to look
like,
that up.
oh, yeah, I know. And I was like, what is like really, like, I don't really understand why that part had to be in there other than just, I guess, maybe to, kind of get me going down the rabbit hole. You know what I mean? And so then you move on to the next part, and within the next year of me having this dream, I actually started working in corrections/law enforcement. I ended up making quite a few contacts in both, active duty and reserve military, some of whom were SF type guys, special operations type guys, a lot of that type of stuff. And so, I start, doing training. I'm a 2A guy. And so, I'm training with a lot of these guys, so on and so forth. And, basically moving forward, that's basically the majority of the type of people that I, surround myself at this point is people who are, law enforcement, former law enforcement, corrections, military,
Okay.
so on and so forth. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that basically kind of ties into that second part of that dream. And then, you get to the school building, and since that dream, I've actually worked at two different schools. I was a welding teacher at one. The other one I was doing, I was a facilities manager, and that one had red brick buildings that were like identical to what we have, what I had
What
in
you
my
saw in your
dream.
dream.
Yeah.
So what are you making
And,
of all this when you're seeing all these
well,
things manifest in your day-to-day life?
and like I said, that brings us to the fourth part of that dream. And, what do we see around us? What is uh, our political atmosphere in our country these days? What is the political atmosphere around the entire world? At first I was like, when I first saw it, I never would have thought like a World War III type option would really be on the table. But, with what we've got going on in Ukraine and Iran and China and Russia and everything these days, that's a little bit more of a possibility these days.
So
You look at,
so maybe we need to be asking you what you're seeing moving forward, so we have an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I got a poker game this
Like,
Friday.
yeah, well, Dane's into playing poker.
How can I?
He might. You guys might need to link up. But no, I mean, I've heard these types of stories from others where I was doing a story in Georgia, and this guy kept seeing like war and destruction. He was, but he was also having premonitions of very personal things that were happening to him and his older father.
Yeah.
I wonder what that is with people having. I've had things where I've had certain thoughts of very bizarre, super weird things, and then they happen.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, because like I know you like with your Civil War series, because you were going through Gwinnett County and all that, and I actually grew up in Gwinnett County.
Huh.
I graduated from Grayson High School.
Oh
So
wow!
if anybody's out there listening that
Shout
went
out
to high
Gwinnett
school
County.
with me, you know, but yeah, I mean,
There's something about Georgia. I'll tell you that.
apparently, yeah. I mean, there's definitely some interesting things that I've seen around there myself. So,
Yeah, I was down
but
there. I was down there right before the Guidestones were blown up.
yeah, yeah, and I've been out that way, you know. So I've been to the Guidestones. There's a few houses that were, whether or not they were actually haunted is, one thing, but they were enough to give you the creeps a little bit. But going back to, I mean, as far as that goes, though, I mean, the best thing you can do is just, make sure that, you're prepared yourself, you know,
Absolutely.
if, I mean, fitness training, making sure that you're, in good physical health, you know, learn stuff, learn survival tips, you
Get
know,
stocked up. Gotta get
yeah,
stocked up.
worst case scenario, make sure you got beans and rice and, stuff that will at least last you a little while until you can get something else, going for yourself. Um, and like I said, these dreams have put me down this path to where, I with what has, come to pass out of these dreams in my life, I have no choice in my life but to do the best I can to prepare for that fourth part of that last dream.
I hear that.
And so,
Well,
yeah,
you if you get more of these crazy premonitions, you can send another one to my email, and
yeah, for sure.
keep us posted. Clayton, I appreciate the phone call.
Yeah, I got one more thing if you got time, but
We got
if
time for
we're
a short one. If it's a short one, yeah, go
all
for
right,
it.
yeah, basically, this one goes into shadow figures.
Oh,
So yeah, same house that I had a couple of the that I had the visions in as well.
so it's
This
back.
one
This
might.
is back when you're younger.
I was early 30s,
Okay.
late 20s, somewhere around in there. Um, and my family, other than my brother, one of my brothers had gone to the store, and they were going to be gone basically all day. My brother and I, we stayed back to take care of the dogs, and in Rocky Ford, La Junta area of Colorado, which is out there on the plains, it's very, very flat. There's basically almost no trees, no nothing. A lot of farms, and our house out there was surrounded by farms. And him and I, we sat down on the couches to watch a movie, and it was probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And all of a sudden, we had two windows, one on each side of the TV, and all of a sudden we see this full-bodied shadow of a person walk right in front of those windows, like they were walking to the gate, to our patio gate. And so him and I were like, "Who is this? That's coming into our house or coming onto our patio?" Because that's how close it was. And after about 10 seconds, we didn't hear the gate open or anything like that. So he hopped up and he ran out the sliding glass door that was right there. And I ran around to the front door, which was 20 feet away, and there's nobody there. There's absolutely nobody there.
And
We ran.
you saw what looked like a physical figure to you.
Oh, full body, hair, everything.
But you heard nothing, right?
Yeah, heard nothing, saw nothing, and we had 3.5 acres out there ourselves, surrounded by several hundred acres of flat farmland. Nowhere to hide, no trees, no nothing. And so, like, him and I are freaking out because we went and cleared the entire property, could not find a single person anywhere. And so, fast forward a few years, and by this point, I'm up in Colorado Springs, and I'm talking to my buddy who happened to know the kid that lived at that house prior to us moving in. And he used to do like, they do like camp outs and stuff like that out in the front yard. And so I'm going through this whole story, and he's like, "You saw the shadow too?" Because apparently him and the kid that lived there before us have been camping out right there in front of those two windows. And about 11 o'clock at night, he said some shadow figure came over their tent that they were sleeping in and just like freaked them out. So
did it have a hat?
That one, I don't know if he never really went into detail on what it had. But I know my brother saw one in his room and freaked his dog out because he found his dog cowering in the corner. So yeah, basically a lot of really weird stuff definitely was happening in that house. I always felt like I was being watched for sure.
Sounds like you have been in waking life and in your dreams. Well, I appreciate you sharing these stories, my man.
Yeah, no problem.
And good luck out there with the world going as crazy as it is.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What's gonna be my first hand?
Do what?
What's gonna be my first hand dealt?
We'll go with pocket jacks.
All right, we're gonna hold you to that.
All right, y'all have a good one.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.
All right, bye.
Bye.